Hey everybody, it's Joe from greenlightsound.com. In today's episode, we're going to go over how to make your drums go from this to this. Every drum mix is a little bit different, so you can apply a lot of the principles I'm going to go over today to your mixes on drums, but I could do another video with a different song and a different drum recording and do a lot of different processing moves, but the general principles will stay the same. I've got 4 in-depth videos that I'm going to link to in the description below that are going to cover some of the topics that I go over in here if you really want to dig in deep. Those have to do with how to align the drums with auto align, how to gate drums with Oxford's drum gate. I have a video on that. How to gain stage with a VU meter. And I've got a video on the Boz pan knob, which is really helpful for panning if you're doing mixes that want to sound good in headphones too. So check the links to those videos down below, but all of those things are applied in this process. The very first thing you would do when importing your tracks into a session to mix, whether it's drums or any other source, would be to gain stage them. So check out my gain staging with the VU meter if you want to check out how to do that. We basically want the signal level to be about -18 dBFS full scale. And that's going to help the plugins react best to that sweet spot coming in and make sure you don't have too much clipping going on. The second thing you'll do with your mix is align everything. Check out the video for how I align drums, but basically you want to make sure these multi-mic'd kit pieces have the drums in time and in phase to give the fullest sound. You'll really notice it most in the kick drum bottom end and the snare drum body. Those two things will be completely missing if you've got really bad comb filtering going on. So check out the video on aligning. So I do that first, I gain stage, I align. Then I bring all my faders down to the very bottom and do a rough mix. No processing at all, just trying to balance things out. Finally, I go into my processing. So this is the rough mix I came up with. So the first element we're going to listen to is kick drum, and here is the raw kick drum sound by itself. And the first bit of processing I did was the auto align, just to make sure everything's time aligned with the other sources. Next, I've got the Oxford drum gate, and again, I've got another video on this if you want to check out the link below. The Oxford drum gate just gets rid of that snare bleed. For the most part, a few little ones sneak through. Next, I put in an EQ. This I cut at the very lowest bottom end, anything below 28 Hertz. I get a little bump in the body of the kick drum up around 142. I'm cutting out some of that mid-range mud, a little bit of beater head sound here, and cutting out the high end here. So with the EQ engaged, we get this. No EQ. EQ in. So not a huge difference, very subtle change here. At this point, I decided, well, can I work with this kick drum or does it need some replacement or supplementing? And there's some controversy around whether to use samples or not, but I think if you've got a source that sounds like this, with one single mic, you can only take it so far. If you really want a competitive sounding commercial style mix, don't be afraid to use some samples. And that's exactly what I did. I went in, I used the UVI drum replacer, which is a great tool. The UVI drum replacer is able to load plugins. So I'm using this kick sound to trigger a Superior Drummer kick drum from Superior Drummer 3. The actual kick I'm using here is a 20 by 22 inch AOT Classic kick. I'm not completely replacing it. If you look at my wet dry here, I'm using some wet signal and dry signal. So I've got both the original kick sound in here, but most of the tone is coming from the sampled kick. So when the samples are engaged, we get this tone. I thought it was a little peaky and I heard a lot of that transient coming through, so I wanted to soften it a bit. And in this case, I used McDSP's analog channel AC202, which is basically a tape emulation. A really old plugin, but it really works well for this purpose. It softens things up with saturation and gives you some tape style compression as well. And one of the unique things about this plugin, compared to most tape emulations, it shows you the amount of tape compression you're getting. Let me show you. When I engage the plugin, watch this meter in the middle here, gain reduction. Without it, and with. Just tightens things up a bit, and it also has a nice low end bump, which is typical of that tape the Japanese T, that's Tascam tape. You can set all kinds of stuff here. We're going with 15 IPS. The EQ type is the IEC2. We've got modern tape instead of vintage, but you can do all kinds of very cool stuff with this McDSP analog channel. Moving on to snare drum. Here's the snare drum sound along with the kick we just processed. In this case, I've got a snare top and a snare bottom, which are being routed to this snare sub channel. That's what this is. And I balanced the snare top higher than the snare bottom, which is typical for snare drum processing. I gated it. If I take the gate off with the gate in, listen in between the hits. A lot of hi-hat bleed. It goes away with the gate. Next thing I did was use the Waves SSL channel here. Did a bit of processing, cutting out the low end up to 70 Hertz, a little bit of top end roll off here. At 16K, I'm pushing about 3 dB. I'm pushing at 3.75K, about 3 dB with a pretty wide bell. For the low frequencies, I've got pulling out about 6 dB at 890 or so. That 800 Hertz range is usually where the mud is. And I'm boosting up a bit of the body of the snare drum around 200 Hertz, just 3 dB. So no real extreme processing. We've also got our dynamics in. One of the cool tricks about the SSL channel is you can put the release as its fastest release, the threshold all the way down to -20, and just use the ratio knob to dial in the amount of compression you want. It sounds like this. Real simple way of dialing in this SSL dynamics section to get some nice punch. I'm not using the gate in here at all, pulling down the volume a bit. And without the SSL processing, we had this. And we get this with the processing. Now, the problem with this, I could probably work with the snare drum sound, but I really wanted to beef it up to compete with that kick drum. So I did choose to use Trigger 2 this time to add some samples in. I've got the mix only at 32%, so I'm supplementing the actual snare drum sound. Here it is with the triggered sounds in. And what you may notice is I'm only getting the triggered sound when the snare is on a full hit. All those ghost notes in between are not being triggered at all. That's coming from the actual raw snare sound. There's the sound by itself, and I'll dial in our triggering. Just gives a nice snap to the snare drum's big hits. When I put it in the full mix, I added this later, I wanted to put some body into the snare drum, so I boosted up with the Waves API 560. A little bit of this body down here at 250 and 125, just boosting a bit. When I engage this, you'll hear the body of the snare come in. I'll bypass. Just that little boost is really huge in getting that body of the snare to pop through. I'm going to come back to the Shep's parallel particles here because what I did is add this on after I got the full mix in, and you'll hear why I needed it in just a few minutes. Got a floor tom here. For the floor tom, again, auto align is our first processing. One of the cool tom tricks you can do, especially if you've got metering built into an EQ plugin, is to boost the fundamental, boost the stick sound, which is usually another peak up here, another octave of the fundamental, and then cut down the middle. So if I don't have this processing on, you'll see what it sounds like. And with processing. It sounds a little unnatural, but when you combine that with the overheads in the context of the full mix, it really does help it cut through and get some body. And again, I'm boosting this first fundamental. You can see the second one up here, I'm boosting that. I'm cutting everything in between. After that, I went with VMR's FG401 VCA compressor for some tom compression. There's no compression. And compress. Pretty high ratio at 5:1, going for a fast-ish release and a slowish attack. Got the makeup gain there, the threshold set, but that's going to vary per source. Next, we've got our hi-hat, again aligned. First, we've got pan knob here, which allows you to have some bleed in one of the channels of your headphones while you pan to one side. It's a really good trick. Check out the video on that. And Pro Q3, just cutting out a little bit at 644 and boosting the top end of the hi-hat. Don't really have to go over the processing too much. It's easy, not much on hi-hat. Here's the hi-hat in. Simple. And we go to our overhead track, auto line again. Dual pan, I flip the overhead left and right channels because I tend to like the sound of drummer's perspective with the hi-hat on the left, the floor tom on the right. It's just a total matter of taste. Some people prefer it the other way around, where you have audience perspective. In this case, I flipped it just to give me drummer's perspective. Pro Q3, I've got a steep cutoff, getting the kick drum out. I was getting some phasing issues between the overhead kick and my actual kick, so I just figured I'm going to cut most of the body of the kick out of the overheads. It makes it a lot easier to process that way. And for compression on the overheads, I went with the MJUC from Klanghelm. It's a great, inexpensive compression plugin, which I highly recommend. I went for a fast attack, fast release, and then you just dial in the compression here with a 4:1 ratio, and that gave me some punch that I really liked. Here it is with the Klanghelm. Mostly having the snare trigger in the overheads without the compression. Listen to the snare drum especially. And back in with compression. Just a little bit of extra snap to that snare drum. Here we've got 3 sampled crash cymbals that came in this mix. All I'm doing here is a little bit of EQ, boosting the high end on the crash. Again, boosting high end on the crash, cutting the bottom end out. And a third crash sample here, same thing, cutting a little bit of the mids, boosting the high end a little bit. Just getting rid of any sounds that didn't sound really good, and getting a little bit of sparkle at the high end of the cymbals. The cymbal hits are only occasionally, and here's where one of them happens. Just to supplement the kit's cymbals. Next, we're going to move on to drum room mic. Here, it's a mono room mic. I boosted up the volume just so you could hear it without any processing. Here is the room sound. I didn't do a whole lot of processing here. The very first thing is Pro Q3, just cutting out the bottom end. And I added the Chandler Limited Zener Limiter, which is a UAD plugin, which has some great sounds with room mic compression. Not doing a whole lot of compression here. But just getting some slight pumping there. And then what I'll do, if you add this into the rest of the mix, I'll usually just dial it into taste. Just gives a little bit of extra energy. Next is simply a shaker part. I used pan knob to make sure we can pan it off to the side without sounding unnatural on headphones. And I used some FabFilter Saturn II for some distortion or drive. Next, we've got a couple of tambourine parts. All I did for these is give a little bit of saturation to take the brightness off the transients with some Saturn II. Not much going on there. When they're thrown into the full mix, you get this sound. So I kept the shaker a little bit off to the right. I have one of these tambourines off to the left a bit and one off to the right. I'm really trying to balance the stereo elements. So I've got my hi-hat a little bit to the left, one of the shakers to the right, one tambo to the left, one tambo to the right. You want balance in those side signals if you can get it. The next thing I did was go for our Andrew Shep's drum dirt trick. Check out the video linked below for how that works, but it gives some nice energy to the drums when engaged. Without it, and with. Just barely dialed in. Next, I've got a drums room track, which is a reverb, and in this case, I went with the T-Rex IK Multimedia Sunset Sound Studio Reverb, and I chose the live room in Studio 3. When we dial this in, here's what we get. Without. And with. And finally, when I put that drum room in there, I was kind of losing the snare drum. Just wasn't giving the amount that I needed in the mix. So I went back, I added the Shep's parallel particles in, I pushed the thickness up a bit, and I pushed the bite up a bit. With this engaged, here's the snare sound. without, and with. And that just really made the snare pop through nicely. And again, just for one more reference, here's the before without any processing. And we went from that to this. So pretty dramatic difference there. If you have any questions or comments, let me know in the comment section down below. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already so we can keep you in the loop as to what's coming up next, and I'll see you in the next one.